Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the next of EMPA's free webinars. Firstly, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to First Nation elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'm joining you today from the land of the Jagera, Gayabal and Jarawar people in southeast Queensland. If you've been to an EMPA webinar before, last year's virtual conference, or you've been online for the conference earlier this year, you should be familiar with the various controls and buttons on your screen. Jump on the chat panel at any time to talk to the panelists and to follow your participants, to your fellow participants, sorry. Just to be sure that have all panelists and attendees selected at the top of your chat window so that everyone will see your comment. After the presentation today, we'll have a Q&A session. Type in your questions to the Q&A panel at any time during the webinar for your presenters to answer live or at the end as a panel. If you have any issues or questions and can't access the chat, just shoot us through an email at conferences@empa.org.au. I'm Barbara Ryan, I'm the Chair of EMPA, and today's webinar is Facebook Tools for Responders, where we'll be hearing from Kylie Holmes, Facebook's Global Policy Head of Crisis and Disaster Response, and Cheryl Seeto, who is Facebook's Policy Programs Manager for New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. Kylie's been a Global Policy Head of Facebook's Crisis and Disaster Response team for 3 years. During this time, she has led policy and programmatic efforts across Facebook's crisis response portfolio, including a global COVID-19 response program in over 170 countries. She has been instrumental to the crisis response product and operations teams in providing policy expertise. Cheryl Seeto joined Facebook over a year ago after an impressive career in foreign affairs and global policy, including time spent in the Indonesian Embassy and the Solomon Islands, and we saw Cheryl at this year's conference. Over to you, Kylie and Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Barb, for the introduction. And well, good morning and kia ora, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy days to join the session, and huge thanks to the organisers at EMPA for inviting Kylie and me to present at this webinar. So as Barb said, I'm Cheryl Seeto and I'm the Head of Policy Programs at Facebook for New Zealand and Pacific Islands, and I'm also the lead in our team on disaster and crisis response across Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. I'm dialing in today from Sydney on Gadigal country, and I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands from which we're all joining and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and while Kylie is by far the main attraction of this session and the absolute expert on Facebook disaster and crisis response tools, I did want to just take a brief moment to introduce myself to those of you who I haven't met before. So I joined Facebook, as Barb said, just over a year ago, and since then I've had the chance to meet with representatives from a number of disaster management agencies and NGOs in Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific. And I did join the Australian EMPA conference in Sydney earlier this year, which was fantastic. It's been really great getting to meet representatives from your organisations, and particularly to hear how you've been using our platforms, especially Facebook, to expand your reach, build trust with your communities day to day, as well as use social media during crises to issue urgent updates and advice, and also to receive real-time feedback from impacted communities on the ground. So it's really helpful for us to hear about your experiences, and so I wanted to highlight that please get in touch if you have questions or feedback along the way. I'll pop my email address in the chat here shortly, so do please feel free to reach out if there's anything that you need or I can help you with. So with that, I will pass to Kylie, who will get started and walk us through today Facebook's key disaster and crisis tools and how they've been used and activated recently, including in our region. Over to you, Kylie.
Hi, and thank you again for inviting us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll talk through it, and Cheryl and I will be going back and forth, so bear with us. But we did want to just walk you through some of our tools, but start maybe from a global perspective in terms of how a company like Facebook may think about disaster, in many ways it's going to look very similar to you in the ways that you think about disaster and the way that you respond to emergencies, and will be very similar in terms of events that we look at in terms of size and type of response. But you will see some differences in terms of how a tech company may approach disaster, and we want to talk through those as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, 1 second. This is always the most cumbersome part of a presentation. So here we go. Okay, I hope everyone can see the full screen there, the Facebook hand with the heart.
All good.
Great. Okay, so let's dive right in. So we've already been introduced. I'm Kylie. We wanted to start with a global perspective and just take a look at kind of what Facebook does on a yearly basis in terms of number of crises that we monitor. Like many of you, we have teams dedicated to monitoring events 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and our remit is now global. So this is an example of the number of crises that we've monitored over a 1-year period. And this map, I believe, is from 2019. So you'll see that the number of dots on the map, it's almost illegible. This is over 1,000 different events that occurred globally in many different places. Now, this doesn't mean that we respond to 1,000 events. In fact, on an annual basis, we respond to anywhere from, say, 100 to 200 events now annually. So the actual portion of these events that result in a response from Facebook, even a small product response, is much fewer than this. So let's go ahead and jump right into what that looks like in your region. I'm going to hand back to Cheryl here to talk about what crisis response from a Facebook perspective has looked like in your 2 countries, in your region, over the last roughly 5.5 years. So 2016 to present.
Thanks, Kylie. So just jumping back in, so you can see on the slides here, over the last 5 years, some of the key events that have seen safety check activated in Australia and New Zealand. You can see in Australia there was an annual average of 4.6 distinct events, and most commonly seen, this I don't think would be a surprise to anyone, were bushfires quite significantly with 18, and flooding 6, so probably not surprising to any of you guys. And then in New Zealand, again, probably not surprising, 1.5 distinct events on average every year, and the most common that we saw were earthquakes and floods and storms. And this is just to break it up, some of the key events that we have seen trigger our safety tools in the last few years. And then on this slide, this just shows some of the top events in Australia and New Zealand over the past 5 years that have triggered our safety tools. So you can see that the top ones there are the really major and very unprecedented events that we have unfortunately seen in our part of the world. The top one there being the Christchurch earthquake in 2016. There were over 300,000 people who marked themselves as safe during that event. Should I go through, Kylie, all of the figures, or maybe I'll just do the top ones? And we had during the mosque attacks in Christchurch, over 100,000 people marked themselves as safe. And the Black Summer in 2019, the bushfires, that first one there, we had just over 93,000 people. And then moving down to the bottom ones, we had that bottom one there with the Queensland floods, Northeast Queensland in 2018, over 36,000 people marked themselves as safe. So that's just to illustrate to you the ways in which people are behaving and how they're activating our tools during these very extreme events that they're coming to Facebook to communicate about.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, and I just realized I should have known this because my family is Australian. I have the dates here in a format that is very American, so apologies here, and I should have switched the day and the month for this audience, so apologies in advance for that, or in the moment. And I think one of the interesting things here that you'll see is like how we may think about large events. It corresponds to the number of people that mark themselves safe on the platform. That may not be exactly how you see it, obviously, being first responders or responding agencies and individuals. you would look at number of people impacted, and then among that, you would have different severity, different severity of impact among different populations. So this is where I think the view from a Facebook perspective is definitely unique. We're looking at people directly and indirectly impacted by an event, but it is all, essentially self-reported. So these are people who have proactively taken the step to mark themselves safe. One of the other questions that we get sometimes is how this corresponds with, say, a Red Cross Safe and Well registry. And the differences are that essentially in this case is someone who's marking themselves safe and notifying friends and family that they're okay. Whereas a Safe and Well registry is really meant to be a place for people to go and search for loved ones who may be missing, and find out about the whereabouts, or how to reestablish those family connections. So in our case, this is information that one shares with their own friends and family online. So it's not meant to be a registry that can be searched. It's not a public status. It is really a private status that is shared with one's friends. So this gives you a way to essentially notify en masse, but there is also a tool for you to request that friends and family mark safe. And Cheryl and I were speaking about this yesterday, just one-on-one, and this is one of the things that we wanted to point out for your region in particular. There is a tool that you will see later when we go through the Crisis Hub that is very commonly used in Australia and New Zealand, that is uncommonly used elsewhere. And I'm not sure if it's because people in the region have gotten comfortable with this tool and how it works, but there is a functionality where you can request that your friend on Facebook mark themselves safe. So it is essentially like a welfare check. We see people using this tool globally, but it's really not used that frequently. But that all changes when we take a look at the events that have occurred in Australia over the course of the last 3 or so years. In both Australia and New Zealand, populations on Facebook actually use this tool pretty regularly. So sometimes we see upwards of, like, say, 60,000 people using this tool to request that a friend or family member mark themselves safe on Facebook. So this is definitely notable and different for your region. So we just want to mention it now because it's not something that we see commonly. Perhaps it is because in places like Australia, you see up to 18 events a year and people have gotten comfortable with this tool. But for us, looking at this from a global perspective, it is something that is very unique to you. So let's go ahead and move on quickly. So usually this brings about, sometimes we do a live demo in this portion, but for this, we thought we would just take some screenshots and talk through how this tool works and how crisis kind of manifests on the Facebook platform. So when there is an event, Facebook essentially takes a look at the epicenter of that event, and we start to monitor activity on the platform, people talking about the event, or people proactively searching for information on an event. We will send out a sample safety check to people in that immediate area. And depending on the response of people in that immediate area, so they'll be asked a series of questions, one of which would be, would safety check be a useful tool at this moment in time? If enough people answer yes to that question, we may send an additional safety check to people in that immediate area. And then it essentially kind of expands out or follows the course of an emergency. So if it's a flood, it would follow the path of the flood. If it's a fire, same thing, it would follow the path of the fire. Essentially just kind of having that interplay between Facebook and the community that we serve. So as soon as we stop kind of getting a response to these questions, or people are proactively saying, this is not a useful tool, we will then stop sending safety checks, or the tool will actually kind of cease and desist in sending new safety check questions or notifications to people on platform. And that's essentially how this activates for an individual who's affected by a crisis. What this then does is that once at least 1,000 people or so mark themselves safe, it will create a dedicated place on Facebook for all information related to this event. So we didn't have any recent, thank goodness, we didn't have any recent examples in your region, but you can see here, this is a snapshot of the Crisis Hub as it looked this morning. The most recent events there along the bottom. So these are essentially all events that have triggered a safety check, and there's been enough activity on platform or enough positive responses from people on Facebook for us to know that it's a significant event, and a crisis page has been created for that event with resources for individuals affected and people wanting to help. So we call this internally the Crisis Hub, but you can just think about it as just a center of information It's really pulling in information from all different sources on Facebook or online. It's not sourcing information from off Facebook platform. So this is what we'll talk about in terms of online preparedness for you all. This is why it's important to be present in the places where you want people to consume the information. In this case, this is pulling Facebook information for Facebook audiences. So I pulled an example that you've probably all heard about here, a recent example from about a week ago. This is the page for Haiti. I've pulled the desktop versions of this, by the way. The mobile versions look slightly different, but I used to work for government myself, so I'm assuming that folks on this call, many of you who work for government or NGOs, probably still work on desktop. So this would be your view. This is how the earthquake in Haiti appears. You'll see here that there are a couple of different tools. We can't scroll, but I'll go ahead and just talk you through them. The first is that an automated fundraiser is created for each event. So this allows people who want to donate in the moment in time. There's always a generic fundraiser created on the page in the Crisis Hub for people to donate to. There is also the option for people to click through and create their own fundraisers connected to this event. But in this case, we have kind of a master fundraiser, which you'll see here. Right below that, you'll see it says all help. There is a surface connected to the Crisis Hub that we call internally community help. But what this is essentially a surface to allow people to ask for assistance or offer help to one another on Facebook. So it is a place where there's a little bit of proactive matchmaking. So people will request, say, a place to stay for the night. Someone else will see that in their feed and subsequently respond, that they may have a place to stay. We've seen a lot of requests for dry goods in cases of floods. We've seen requests for information on, say, people who are missing after an event. We see lots of requests related to babies, diapers, etc. So that'll all be here. And really, this just allows community members, it's a one-to-one connection. So generally, community members can help each other here. We have also seen organizations participate in this space. So this is kind of the one-to-many, right? So organizations that have a page can also post in this surface. And we've seen this used in past for organizations essentially to notify an affected community, say in a flood, that there's a new shelter opening, or that a distribution of, hygiene items will be taking place on a specific date and time. So this can also be a one-to-many or a one-to-one connection. So we haven't actually seen organizations use this as frequently as we had imagined that they probably would. So this is something that we're still testing and learning. But this surface exists in the majority of crises that trigger safety checks globally. You'll also see here, just noting what we learned earlier, this is asking me at the top here if I'm in the affected area. So I have actually lived in Haiti previously, and I do have friends in Haiti. So Facebook here is asking me if I might potentially be in Haiti, because sometimes people have location services off or something else, and we may not know if an individual is in Haiti, or perhaps they were recently in that country and have since traveled. But this essentially allows you to proactively go in and mark yourself safe if we're not notifying you, but you do indeed want to notify friends and family that you're okay. You can do this in the immediate days after a crisis. This will go away after a while. What you can't see here is also in this tool, there is the ability to request that friends check in. So that's something that you may see or use depending on where you live. Let's go ahead and actually, sorry, one more thing I will note. In the right, you see that there is a box under safety check with a little telephone symbol, essentially talking about if you need emergency assistance. In developing this tool over time and in consultation with emergency organizations and individuals like yourself, we also want to be clear about what this tool is not. So safety check is not a way to seek urgent help or assistance if you are in crisis. And so over time, we've developed this, we've tested a few different things, but this is essentially telling people if you need urgent help, you should call your designated emergency number. So, there have been questions around whether or not Facebook should then have an I'm not safe button and what that might mean. After many consultations, we've gone this route to essentially say, that's not a place that the company wants to be. We don't want to be between individuals and first responders. So we will essentially recommend that people who are checking in, if they're not safe, to check in, or sorry, to reach out directly to emergency personnel. So what does preparedness look like in this context? You'll see some examples that you'll be familiar with. You'll see some examples that may be from other regions. But this is why sometimes when we're talking to audiences like this, we love to say, like, think about what all of this means to you. And what I love to talk about with government agencies and NGOs that I talk to is really preparedness in the traditional sense is true online as well. So you may be thinking about all of the ways to prepare for a storm season or a bushfire season, for example, but thinking about your presence online should be part of that. And the first thing that you should think about is, do I have an online presence? And is that on the services that people use the most in this country or context? So it may be Facebook, it may not be Facebook, it may be another app or tool or page, and that's okay, but you should try to map it out and figure out if you have a presence in all the places where people may be seeking information. So this is an example from your region. You'll see New South Wales Rural Fire Service, kind of a local a celebrity agency at this point. But they have, a page that actually has a lot of followers. So we'll walk through that. So they've essentially done a really good job with online preparedness. So we wanted to just put that example here, and we can talk through some of the other things that you should think about. So the steps to online preparedness would essentially be to create a page. So here you'll see another example from your region. Next, you'll see an example that's not from your region, but I used it because it has hashtags that you may want to consider. For example, after you have a page, you want to think about building your audience and posting to your page. And in this case, this is an example from the United States, but they're posting to their page. They're posting about violent events, mass shooting here, but they're using hashtags. And we see a lot of agencies using hashtags, and this is actually a good idea because hashtags do help with distribution on social media. So you'll see something, you'll see here, it's see something, say something, but hashtags can also be a region, or if there's a particular slogan circulating after an event, that's also a good thing to post here. The other thing that you would want to do when you're doing your online preparedness is think about who you want to be connected to online. So if you're a page, you want to find like pages or related pages and connect yourself to them in the Facebook way, which is liking them in this case. But that connectivity helps Facebook understand distribution of material and understand if an audience is, if someone is, for example, following both pages, then the information from both of these entities will be relevant to them. And there may actually be some opportunities for cross-posting of information from one page to a page that page has liked. So liking pages works very much in the same way as maybe how you would like a celebrity's page or, liking content that you would see on social media. But it is something to think about when setting up your online presence. This is the hashtags tip. I scooped myself, so forgot that I had a pop-up there. One of the other things that you can and should think about when you have a Facebook page is how to use a tool like Live. Other social media platforms have tools like this as well. But what is not very well known is actually what happens when you say use the Live tool on Facebook. Never mind, I'm recalling. You do have experience with Live and how that can go wrong, essentially, given our experience in New Zealand recently. But it is also a good tool to use in emergencies in that it does broadcast to the followers of that page that the emergency management agency or individual is speaking or posting something. And this does appear prominently in people's timelines and as a notification on mobile devices. So if you're making a big announcement or have something like an evacuation warning or alert, it is a good idea to use the Live tool in this way. You want to use the calendar tool also to publicize events. Here you'll see this is Virginia. There were a series of tornadoes in Virginia, and they were essentially using the tool to organize trainings around tornadoes and what to do and shelter in place, etc. And then on the right, you'll see an example here from your region again, Messenger. When creating your online presence, you do want to think about how to use Messenger. How do you want to use the interactive messaging tools? Again, it may not be Messenger, it may be something else on a different app. but really think about in advance how you want to have this configured. If you have an open messenger, you will have people in emergency events reaching out to you, requesting assistance or information, and you will need to have someone or think about having someone manning that that messenger account, as frequently as possible. And perhaps in some cases it is indeed 24 hours. An alternative to that would be to have, like in this case, they have a messaging bot, clearly. So they have some frequently asked questions that people can click on and receive immediate answers. You can also have it set up with sort of an out of office message that will direct people to an emergency line or emergency number. So this is something that you just want to be thinking about as you're setting up your presence. How are you going to use the live messaging tools? Do you want to have it configured? Do you want to have it turned off? Or do you want to have it set up to some sort of automated function? But this will become, either a blessing or a curse in an emergency in terms of like how impacted individuals or concerned individuals will want to interact with you. And this is like the question, so what does preparedness look like? This is a screenshot actually of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. I was floored when I saw this. These are exceptional numbers. You see they have over 700,000 people who like or follow the page. This, I would say, is a prepared agency. So they will get great distribution of content on social media and on Facebook. So this is a very good communication tool in times of crisis, just given the number of people who have subscribed essentially to messaging on this page. So this is how you can know if you're building your audience. You just see if a number of people have increased who are following or liking your page. And once you achieve kind of a good number, and for a smaller territory or city or neighborhood, the number actually doesn't have to be that high. It's all relative to the amount of population that you cover. But this is how you know essentially that you've achieved success in the preparedness space here. One other tip, I know we want to move on quickly, but one other tip in this space is that I know that New South Wales Rural Fire Service does this, and I know some other entities in the US do this as well. In the off season, or when it's not emergency time, you can still post engaging content that is not emergency focused or oriented. We have a disaster management agency in the United States that posts jokes, for example, but that really helps build an audience. So you may want to think about what other engaging content you can post. It could be related, but how do you kind of keep up the momentum of posting and engaging your audience in the off season so that you have that audience there when you need them? And Cheryl, I'm going to go through this very quickly. I want to watch time so we have time for questions and discussion. But we did want to briefly touch on two tools that are relatively new in the Facebook world, but it is our hope that these will become and be very interesting tools for you in the region and in fact globally. One of those is a tool that we are currently piloting in Australia. It's called Local Alerts. And I don't have Australian examples here actually. So these are examples from the US. Local Alerts is essentially a way for an individual agency or entity to post a message on Facebook using the normal composer, but to mark that message as a local alert. What this does is it sends out, again, a notification for people, for audiences kind of on their phones in a really prominent way at the bottom, but it essentially acts as an emergency notification. It's not the same as a cell phone-based emergency notification system. It's not at that level, but it is a very good supplemental tool to use if you're a disaster management agency and you need to send out a similar message across platforms. You're sending out the cell phone alert, but you also want to send something on social media. Local Alerts is a tool that we're currently testing in Australia now. We had rolled it out in the United States, and we're trying to see how this works in other markets. The infrastructure that it was built on right now is very oriented geographically to the United States. So we'll have to make some changes to this tool to be able to roll this tool out globally. But we're looking to learn from the Australian context and how this is used best, maybe when it's not so helpful, etc., in these markets so that it can become a useful tool for government agencies globally. And so we're testing this out. We can talk about it more in detail if you'd like. But all signs are that this is meeting a need on the government side. We still need to continually learn and make some changes, but it is meeting a need. It's filling kind of a void at the moment. So you've got the cell phone based messaging and you've got the normal social media messaging and the print messaging, but this is a way to send out something that's a little bit more prominent and perhaps geo-targeted to a more specific location. But we'll learn more about this and hopefully come back and talk to you about it next year. And this is a tool, we'd be remiss if we didn't just touch on this, but again, just noting that this comes with some caveats. We have an amazing Data for Good program where we can share anonymized and aggregated data to help understand what is happening kind of in the fog of war or after a crisis. Disaster Maps essentially takes Facebook user information, anonymizes it, and puts it in map form to help responding organizations and agencies understand things like population movement, for example. This tool, I'll show you what a map, I've chosen a map from the United States on purpose. This tool, when it works well, it's beautiful. It doesn't work well for all crises. And I'll just quickly touch on why it may not work so well for, say, bushfires in Australia. When we think about events and how we activate, say, Safety Check, it's very localized. So we're looking at a localized fire in one specific location. And although all of these fires may be connected in terms of, following a similar weather or resulting from a similar weather pattern and similar conditions, we would activate multiple safety checks for a fire event that may span a pretty big geographic region. And this happened in 2019. But our maps correspond to the safety check data for the specific location. So in some cases, it's not going to give you that conglomerate view that would be most helpful for responding agencies to look at the event and surrounding parts and regions. Where it does work well is in a case, say, like this. This is a hurricane that hit the United States. It was a discrete event. It hit a very specific place. And in that, we could see some population anomalies. So we could see, say, in blue and red, the red areas you can see are areas where there are more people than we would expect to see in social media in that location. And the blue areas are showing where there are fewer people than we'd expect to see. And the depth of color indicates kind of the degree of difference. What this means and what this map tells us, for example, is we're looking at some of the low-lying areas here that are shown in blue, the populations that are normally in that location at this point in time. So on an average, let's see, for you it's Wednesday, for me it's Tuesday. So on an average day like today, how many people would we expect to see in this area? Of course, it's a small subset of users that have location services activated on their device, but it is generally statistically significant. But this shows us that we see fewer people in this low-lying area, of course, would make sense in a case like a hurricane or a cyclone. And we can actually see that they've moved to some other parts of the state and even across state lines in this particular case. This was very useful information for disaster and first responders in this particular event. And you can see their little orange dots on here. This is one of our partners, and they pre-positioned medical supplies in anticipation of this event. After consuming the data here, they did decide to reposition some of those supplies to kind of follow the population. So we do think this tool is like really useful and can be absolutely amazing. We still need to learn better, better knit together the data, for example, for events that are related, like bushfires, that occur over a wide geographic area. So that's something that we'll hopefully be adjusting and learning in the months and years ahead. So I will quickly just transition right over to Q&A. Cheryl, did I miss anything that we should touch on more in depth?
No, that was awesome, Kylie. I just might just take this opportunity to put in an extra plug as well for local alerts in Australia for the fire and emergency services agencies and others that have been given access to it at the state and territory level. As Kylie said, we're really keen to get more feedback and see more users starting to test the tool and share with us how your experiences are, because that is the best way for us to be able to improve the product and understand how it's working in Australia versus the US, which has been the first country that it's launched in. So just a little plug for those who do have access to it to please give it a go and feel free to keep an open channel of communication with us about how that's going, and very happy to help as you sort of embark on your local alerts journey for those government agencies who do have access to it in Australia.
Thanks so much, Kylie and Cheryl. That's amazing. Some really incredible data and information, and also resources that we can use. A few questions. One here from Andrew Marshall. He presumes that the marked safe notifications can be displayed spatially. Could this spatial feed be shared with the nominated response local governments so they can get a sense of where the heat is, a heat mapped, so to speak?
So this is a functionality that exists on the disaster maps feature. So that what I showed you there with Hurricane Michael in the US, because it is aggregated and anonymized, however, it will be kind of one layer up. So it will be at the neighborhood level versus at the individual household level. There is something we do, our data scientists use these terms, and sometimes I'm hoping I'm using them correctly, but we do some spatial smoothing to ensure that if there are any anomalies, say a rural area that only has 3 households in it, we would actually go ahead and remove that data set because it is a little bit too personal and not anonymized enough. But generally, yes, the disaster maps data is data that can be used and in this particular way. And right now, with disaster maps, what we're able to do is partner with nonprofit organizations, but we have a data sharing agreement, essentially, that most government agencies may have trouble working their way through the data sharing agreement, but we've worked around, we've worked with this by partnering with nonprofit organizations who can then partner with the government agency. So the partner actually that I featured on that map, Direct Relief, they have served in this capacity. They do have a presence in Australia, actually, where they will go ahead and ingest the data and then produce maps on behalf of the government partner, or in a format that can be layered onto other maps that are used by government partners.
Misha Hill asks, as well as commenting how awesome this has been, how does information get pulled into the crisis page? So how can the official source's most accurate information get pulled into it? And how can organisations like local emergency management offices be part of it?
So it is all automated. And really the way that it works is actually pretty simple for this particular service on Facebook. It's all about recency and relevance. So if you are an agency responding to a particular geographic area and you're using terminology related to that area or related to the event, as long as you're publishing that content on Facebook, it will be pulled into the surface automatically. I think some of the questions that I've had from some of our partners in the past is questions around things that are happening off platform. So maybe they're publishing a lot of content on their website, for example, or in other services like, say, Twitter. Right now, this is only pulling in content that exists on Facebook. So it's really important, if you are producing content on a different surface, just carbon copy that to a post on Facebook, or write a little topper and link to the website where you have this information displayed, because that will kick it into the crisis surface and create some distribution on Facebook, just to give you that little, an edge up. But yeah, it is all automated.
Great. Okay. I had that question too. Philip Krasnov asks, safety checks are nice to haves for individuals after emergency event has already happened. For emergency service agencies, we need to warn citizens quickly before an emergency hits. And he asks about the Facebook tools that agencies can use for warnings, but I think you might have covered that. That's all automated too, I'm assuming?
So this would really be the local alerts tool, I think, is the sweet spot here. So that in that case, you would want to compose the message on Facebook, and you would want to mark the message as a local alert. It's an additional button that only appears for the agencies that are onboarded to this product. When you do that, it actually allows you to select the geographies that you want the message to go to. So it does allow you to really target the message to very specific, say, like at the sub-municipal level, a handful of neighborhoods, or if you want to do it at the territory level, you can. This is one thing that we're still working out, though, just to put a caveat in here. Of course, for privacy reasons, and it's an individual user's choice, most most of the phones actually, so more than 50%, people will not have their location services activated. And so, essentially Facebook will have to guess if they're in the region or area. Say they may have on their particular page, they may say they live in a specific town, and that would be a signal. And then they would receive distribution of something that is targeting that specific town, but we don't always know. And this is where there's a little bit of, there's a little bit of a behind the scenes look that we're not even privy to, essentially. So, we may not have an idea that a user is in a particular area unless they've signaled to us that they are, but it does allow you to target to the best of your ability, to the best of our ability. And usually what we see is that if you compose those messages and tag related pages, for example, in the body of the message, it will distribute the message to the followers of those pages as well, which helps get you a little additional distribution and more eyes on the content.
Okay. Andy Chan asks if there is a demographic consideration about who these tools are aimed at.
Well, it really mirrors the population, the online population in a particular country or locale. We have had events in the past, say in Northern California, where we know, say, that the demographics are skewed towards a particular, age group, for example, or not. And we have worked with partners on the offline side to try and have some sort of response around who's not seeing the content, who's not online, who's not able to use these tools. We do actually have a pretty big distribution of population across all age groups, generally using Facebook's tools. But there is always the populations that are maybe second language speakers, or individuals that might be elderly, for example, or have other accessibility issues that aren't really benefiting from the content as much as others. And so this is really where some of the offline work in coordination with organizations and agencies can and should and is done, because we also want to learn here, what more can be done. But I think this is also kind of one of those things where we always encourage organizations to think about these tools as supplemental. So you would never, obviously I'm speaking to crisis responders, so this is all stuff but we would never want you to have a single source of communication to a population. So think about this as one that you would add on in layers to your telephone communications, your radio communications, and some of the emergency alerts going out on cell phone.
Yeah. So it's important to have a pointer to look after offline neighbours and friends as well. And he also asked, what would crisis tools be useful for the current COVID pandemic to identify different infection zones? Have you been doing any work on that?
I love these questions. Yes, actually. So our COVID Information Center and many of our COVID tools are actually based off of our crisis tools and the experience that we've had since 2011 in the crisis space. So learning from Marked Safe, the Crisis Hub, and some of the things that exist in disasters, we created a set of parallel tools around COVID, slightly modified, right? So the Crisis Hub for COVID exists, but in this case, it pulls in, it's more kind of like, the content is very specific to health. So you must be a health entity, a recognized health entity, and the content, you have to meet more stringent criteria in terms of, keywords used or content. So it's a much more limited scope, but it is very similar to the surface. A lot of the same functionality exists. Same thing for local alerts, actually. So we're still testing this right now, but we did see some organizations in the US mostly who already had this tool repurpose it for COVID alerts. So they were using it for stay-at-home orders or information about the virus and levels of the virus in particular communities. So we did do some changing of that tool to allow it to be a little bit more fit for purpose for COVID specific use by public health agencies who weren't previously actually onboarded to this tool. So previously it was disaster response agencies, police and fire, but we went ahead and onboarded medical entities so that they could also use this tool for the same purpose. And we did find that, in fact, even COVID, some of these tools have proven to be more utilized actually in this context than they are for disasters. So it's been a really good learning experience for us.
Yeah, it'd be really valuable updating people on changing rules and all of that sort of thing. Hannah Karotis asks if you can include live video with a local alert.
You know, I do not know with confidence the answer to that question. I believe not, but you can link to a video that you may have already produced that is live and then archived on your page. I have never personally seen a local alert that was done with live video, so I'm not sure it's a functionality that exists. Cheryl, correct me if I'm wrong here, though. I know you're in the trenches on this one.
I think you're right, Kylie. I think you can upload like photographs, definitely, possibly a video, a short video, but not a live video, I understand.
Yeah, and this is actually where Facebook Live and local alerts, they function in very similar ways. So if you were to do a live, it would also send out the notification to page followers and individuals who are connected. Say if you tagged others in your post or in your live, it would also notify them in a very prominent way. So it would almost satisfy the same purpose if you were to use live, just independently of the local alert. So they work in a very similar way.
Great. Okay. Shauna Bryce is asking if you can just make some clarification on how the local alert works for dissemination across social media platforms outside Facebook, or did she misunderstand and local alerts will only go to those following you on Facebook? She just needs a bit more detail.
Okay, and Cheryl, correct me here. So right now, local alerts is only, it exists on Facebook for Facebook. So it won't pull in content from off the Facebook platform. But I think this is my bad. I think I was maybe confusing. So thanks for the opportunity to clarify here. If you want to do a local alert that links to off-platform content, you can just do that in the composer. So you would type a short message on Facebook, say you have more information on evacuation zones or something that exists on a web page that is regularly updated. You would just want to write a quick topper and then include a link to the content that exists off platform. So it'd be sent out as a local alert, but then there would be that link to the off platform content, if that makes sense.
And here's a good one. Wolf Coughlin asks about the non-linear nature of Facebook. Would it be possible to consider offering emergency pages the ability to depreciate the value of, i.e. the weighting of a post for a warning that's expired without actually removing the post completely?
Yes, this sounds like someone who may be speaking from experience here. So the emergency tools that exist, the ones that we went through today, those are all recency and relevance. So the way to do that would be essentially to publish a post on top of the post that you'd previously published. So the more you post, the more it would push down the distribution of the content that is older. So this is why, we always say maybe 2 to 3 times a day in a crisis, you'd want to post, and then that would bring forward the most recent post, and the other posts would fall further in the distribution. But what the question is pointing to is that there is not 100% universal distribution of posts on Facebook. So say you're the New South Wales Rural Fire Service and you do a post, not all 700,000 people that subscribe to your page would receive a notification of that post. It would not be in all 700,000 people's timelines, because what it's competing with are posts from other pages that they've liked, or their friends' posts, or maybe an update from their sister or something like that, that may be deemed as kind of more relevant to that person based on their own interaction with content on the platform. So this can definitely be frustrating if you're an emergency response agency and you're seeing people interact with an old post. So you can always go back and edit posts, for example, and just note that a newer post has been made. Look for the most recent post published on this time. That would be my recommendation. But this sounds like someone who's actually experienced this, probably in the middle of a crisis, and it was very unwelcome. So apologies for that. But this is, unfortunately, this is kind of the side of social media that people don't always love, is that you are competing with a lot of other content, and that may just be the latest meme or celebrity gossip. which isn't truly as important, but might get more interaction.
Yeah. Misha's got another question. Do you have any tips on what makes a post get wide reach, aside from having a large following?
So local alerts do get wide reach and distribution because of how they're published. If you post and tag other entities that also have a big following, for example, if you're, say New South Wales Rural Fire Service and you tag some cities in your region and they also have a following, that would be a way to increase distribution. But also post engagement does really matter here. So if you have people who are interacting with a post, asking questions or sharing it themselves, that will sort of be a signal to the platform to increase distribution or to send it to similar people who may have a similar interest. But I think the way that you can control this as the poster yourself is to truly think about, should you use hashtags? Should you tag other related agencies or entities in the post? And then maybe have just some sort of informal agreement amongst yourselves to share each other's content when it's related and relevant. That can be a really good way to easily increase distribution in a way that is kind of more controlled by the poster itself.
Okay. Here's one that I like because Nikki Haslinghouse asks about, have you got any examples of higher education institutions like large unis using some of these tools for crisis in any form?
Great questions. I should have been expecting these great questions from this group. I'm trying to think. So we have had some school shootings, for example, that have taken place in the United States where there has been a safety check and there have been communications from universities or education institutions online where they're sharing information about the event. So it is used. But right now, for example, say the local alerts tool, that is a tool that is built specifically for government. So in this particular case, they wouldn't be onboarded to that tool. But we do see academic institutions using kind of all of the other features on Facebook pretty regularly. They tend to be like quite sophisticated users, actually, probably in that they have, like plenty of potential assistance from students that are at their institutions in helping them keep abreast of sort of the latest trends in social media and use of technology. But I'd say also one thing is that they generally have pretty good followings as well. So if you go to a university, you're very likely to follow the page of that university. And so they do use it in that way, and they get a lot of positive feedback in that like content is pretty engaging and very relevant to the audience that follows their page. So yeah, we have seen it, but I'd say for crisis management, not in particular. We have seen, though, academic institutions, I should say, have used the fundraising tools on social media related to events that may have affected their student body. So it's kind of across, it's not crisis management in the way that you're thinking, but definitely using the tools.
Yeah, I can see it would be really helpful. Daniel Charlton asks, how does Facebook assign what is an affected area? So do you reach out to users to mark themselves safe? Is this provided to you via official sources, or is it a standard area, or is it crowdsourced? Does the affected area change as an event unfolds?
All of the above, yes. So essentially what we do is we do ingest a lot of publicly available information to determine the immediate area of crisis. So our global security teams and the teams that monitor events globally, they are ingesting information from, weather agencies, geological agencies, emergency management entities. They probably follow many of you. So they are ingesting a lot of content to help them understand in the immediate moments after a crisis, kind of where that initial area might be. But then after that, the emergency does take on a life of its own based on interactions from the community. So this is, for us, is actually great because we do like the tool to be automated in that it is community activated and tracks the community in this way. We never really wanted it to be, when this was initially conceived, a person at Facebook making these decisions for the individuals affected. So it really is, looking for feedback from people who might be in the affected area. And that's why, we essentially would call this tool community activated, and why it does follow the flow of an event. And in some cases, it does surprise us, right? So say for an event that is a little bit more amorphous or ambiguous in nature, or something where there's just not a lot of information. And fires sometimes meet this criteria. Maybe they're not clear bounds, or maybe you live in New South Wales or Queensland, but you're not in the fire area, but you're getting a lot of questions from friends and family on your well-being. We will see users go ahead and mark themselves safe, even if they're not in immediate physical harm or in the area. And this is because for them, it's just like very efficient way for them to notify people that they are out of harm's way. So we will sometimes see a safety check be concentrated in the area of the event, but then there will be sort of an outlier community that is proactively seeking out the tool and marking themselves safe purely for like notification purposes to put their friends' minds at ease.
Yeah, okay. Probably time for one more question. With the Crisis Hub, how do individuals access that? So you were talking about the Crisis Hub being a sort of a clearinghouse for offers of help, and that's where you'd access the donations page and all of that type of thing. How does that appear to the individual?
So this is a tool that has changed over time. Initially, it was a surface that was sort of, open to all, promoted to many. Over time, what we've found is that it's really most useful for the community impacted and sort of people who are in the immediate area. So in the, maybe not in the town or the city impacted, but in the state impacted, etc. So right now, this tool would be maybe promoted or prompted to you if you were thought to be in the geographic area of impact or in kind of the immediate periphery. You can always go in and look for it through some of the bookmarks that exist on Facebook or even through the search tool. But when we say like on platform, it might be promoted to you or suggested to you, or we'd recommend that you take a look at the surface. That would really depend on if you are in kind of this immediate area, or if we see that you have a lot of connections to the area impacted. Maybe you have like 5 to 10 friends that have marked safe. We may ask, if you want to check out local help and consider posting in that space, because it's clear to us that you have a connection to the community impacted. So it is there for everyone to find, but it is usually promoted to people who are thought to be close, proximal to the event. And that's largely because the help offered is usually something that you may want to pick up in person or services that are offered locally.
Thanks, Kylie. Thank you again, Cheryl and Kylie, for this presentation. I think the number of questions indicates how informative it's been. And thank you all for watching this and for contributing all of your ideas and questions. We hope to see you all at our next webinar on the 29th of September, where we launch the foundation document for all we do here at EMPA, the EMPA principles. It's a milestone in the development of our organisation, so we hope to see you there. This will be followed in October by a webinar from Kelly McKinney on his latest project, a new book, Epicenter, Navigating the Coronavirus Crisis in New York City. So make sure you keep an eye on your inbox and the website for all the updates, and thank you all for joining us, and have a great week.